Hello and welcome to the Get Sustainable show produced by ESBN in partnership with Green Europe Today and Livestream Studio. This week I'll have the pleasure of speaking to CEE ESG Manager for global advisory firm PricewaterhouseCoopers, Mr. José Miguel Salazar Hernández. Saying that right, José?
Yes, very good pronunciation. And thank you very much for the invitation, Miroslav.
Thank you very much for being on our show. So José, now the consequences of the Russian invasion of Ukraine has caused the greatest humanitarian crisis in Europe since the Second World War. And in addition, according to the latest announcement by the IMF, the negative economic effects will hurt global growth significantly, impacting food and fuel prices as well as raising the prospect of unrest in poorer countries. So how should businesses adapt their strategies? What should they be currently investing in to safeguard for the near future? And what can they do to help communities they operate in?
Sure, thank you for the question. So these are very difficult times, very uncertain ones as well. And for many businesses right now, they're facing a very challenging landscape.
Mm-hmm.
We still haven't exited from the COVID. We're still facing the impacts, and the recovery has not been very evenly. We still haven't exited that.
Yeah.
Now with the impact of the Russian war in Ukraine, of course, for many businesses, they need to refocus and reprioritize and see how is it impacting themselves, direct operations, communities where they operate, their stakeholders. So in the short term, we will see that there's a very significant shift to give protection and safety for the employees, stakeholders, the communities where they operate, their clients, suppliers, to the extent that that's within their range and scope. And then, of course, assessment of the risks that they are exposed, current ones and future ones, especially given the sanctions, the impact of the war, the changing landscape, and understand between the finance, legal, and operation teams what kind of risks are exposed, how's the best ways to mitigate, and for the companies that they are reporting publicly, to make sure that there are the relevant disclosures for the investors and also for the stakeholders at large. And it's a very significant change. However, it's understandable that perhaps ESG agenda might fall out of the more short-term immediate focus.
Mm-hmm.
Quite similar with what happened in COVID, during the COVID pandemic. But we see the same that when we have such an impact, makes the society at large, including businesses, including investors, including governments, to reassess the entire situation, reassess where's this direction going, and then of course have different focus about the long term. We're seeing this right now in the EU, that we already had the EU Green Deal that has been approved, and also having different set of impacts through regulations and businesses, but also with the impact of the actions from Russia in Ukraine. And the sanctions, REPower EU, a new set of legislation that is aiming to decouple energy dependence from Russia and use of Russian oil and gas. It's also going to accelerate further the transition. So these kinds of things, is important that businesses have it in mind when they're planning for the long term, understanding what is the implication for them, the role that they play in this transformation, and also what are the steps that they can take to make sure that they are future fit within this new operating context.
Challenging times for everyone at the moment, and I guess it's a case of think globally, act locally, work in a transparent way, and try and react as best as can to the changing landscape. Moving on to ESG, we've heard quite a lot now about ESG strategies undertaken at the very top level amongst the world's largest businesses. So perhaps you could share some more data on how widespread this has been adopted. But my question concerns more on your take on the sort of trickle-down effect. So how are ESG strategies being enforced at regional, local levels within larger businesses, and also amongst small to medium-sized companies?
Sure. So we could think about large businesses as social organisms. Mm-hmm. They have a different set of expectations by all the stakeholders that they have in their surroundings. And we see that for large companies, ESG, the conversation of ESG has been taking place for a long time, have been receiving different sets of pressure points and, let's say, incentives to take action as well.
Yeah.
A good indicator to measure this could be, let's say, the number of sustainability or ESG reports that have been produced by large companies. We could see it in the US, like S&P 500. More than 92% of the companies have published such a report. In the UK, like FTS Russell, 1,000, like more than 80%. And this stat is very consistent in many territories around the world.
Okay.
If we look at the largest companies in every country, let's say the 100 largest companies for many countries actually is like all the 100 companies are already reporting.
Mm-hmm.
However, this alone doesn't tell that the company itself is like entirely ESG agenda driven.
Mm-hmm.
The report is just like a communication tool.
Yes.
But it has already started to set the tone about like how this is giving some integration of these factors into the company. For some companies, they're already shaping the strategy. And to your question of the trickle down, it's interesting because part of it comes like from the government changes in regulation. Part of it comes like from new expectations by institutional investors that
Yes.
they are realizing the value creation opportunity from the incorporation and better stewardship on ESG factors.
Mm-hmm.
And the impact on financial performance. So there's like requirements from regulatory side, investor side, and then of course society at large, like our values, like our expectations about like who are our employers, the companies that we buy products from, are also changing. So there's that, in a way, trickle down and also grassroots and bottom-up approach.
Yes.
From ESG, I will also say that for many large companies, the origin of the ESG inside of their operations was entirely something bottom-up.
Yeah.
That employees inside the company, they organized themselves and they started to understand like what can they do to set some initiatives, maybe project level or pet projects or innovate through some products, and that started to get noticed by higher level management.
Yep.
So we see both situations. Now, some more mature large companies, they have these well-defined strategies, and these strategies are enlarging to include the scope of the supply chain,
Mm-hmm.
value chain as well. And here's also like where it comes back to the SMEs, because for many companies that they're setting like 100% renewable energy targets or circularity targets, once they reach it in their direct operations, they will enlarge that to the supply chain, the SMEs, and expectations will come in that regard. An advice I could give to SMEs is that just for large companies, the same, like the range of ESG topics is very wide. However, what's important is like the prioritization and understanding what are the most relevant to your company specific situation, and also understanding, let's say, if this is becoming an important condition for making business with large companies, how can you come and differentiate yourself and as well create competitive advantage, create value for the company while meeting these social and environmental objectives.
Yeah, it's an interesting point that you made, that ESG is not a subject that is enforced top up onto businesses. It's often a key factor in building strong teams, because people, individuals, want to work in companies and organizations that act in a responsible, sustainable way. So if your business doesn't adapt, then this workforce will move on to other opportunities. Now, one area we are keen to focus on in our programming is to ensure that the materials that we produced are of high content quality and for our audiences to enjoy and learn from, as opposed to just a marketing opportunity. So from your experience, what would you define greenwashing as? And what should companies do to ensure that their activity has a high social and environmental value, is fit for purpose, and is taken as genuine?
Well, it's actually very tempting at times to fall for, let's say, communicating different initiatives or projects or activities as something that is green.
Yeah.
While perhaps the company, in, let's say, a wider picture, the activities it has are not so green or brown or like high carbon, or like we could define it in different ways. However, in order to discern what is like greenwashing or not, it comes to see like what is the essence of the communication. Let's say if it's something that's being made in specific terms, like if it's something measurable that we can also see, let's say if in talking about commitments or targets, if it's something that is time bound, or if we're just saying like, oh yeah, we're aiming to decarbonize, but if the part of like how by when or how much, then we're missing that component. So maybe the communication there is not complete. And of course for stakeholders and the ones that they are like becoming more aware and informed about how to assess different ESG set of performances, they will start to understand like what is actually just communication message and what is like a tangible commitment and performance. Right now we also have a different set of standards and frameworks regarding ESG for specific topics, specific industries as well. So those are in a way dictating like those indicators, the performance, and that we can actually like use them to objectively assess that something is being done in true matters or not.
So from what you're saying, it's important to adapt a smart formula to your activities, be ambitious in your goals, and avoid empty promises that just talk about action but not actually not much substance being behind it.
Sure. And also, if I may add, and thank you for bringing that, like, that smart goal setting framework. When we're talking about goal setting, that's a very accurate way of, let's say, assessing this. And another thing that's also important is about the materiality of, let's say, what we're talking about. Because, let's say, for some companies, maybe the activity that right now they're branding or communicated as something green.
Yes.
However, the impact compared to their operations or their main products is not even as close to offset it, then the actual performance, the actual impact in the world doesn't really change.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's still in, let's say, negative terms.
Yeah.
So this is also a way of, let's say, assessing like what's the situation with the communications. And just to say one last thing about greenwashing, and this is something very prevalent in many companies. Actually, in my previous experience, I was also working in a consulting firm under a public relation firms. So for many companies, they position sustainability or ESG on their marketing and communication departments. And there's, of course, opportunities for brand enhancement and reputation. However, if we will just leave it there, there's a wide range of opportunities and value creation that might not be assessed or like taken from strategic perspective, that it would be worthy and advice for companies to go and take them for a more strategic lens and see like what's the transformation potential. Yeah,
so let the actions speak for themselves. If it's strong and good enough, then the message will spread.
Yes, yes.
So now it's clear that each business and each sector have different challenges in terms of reaching the ultimate goal of net zero. We've spoken about the brown carbon brown industries as opposed to industries that have a more green inherently. Some sectors have it easy. In some cases, the challenge seems impossible to meet with the current technologies available. So what are these challenging sectors? And what advice would you give to businesses within them if they wish to operate responsibly in solidarity with the need for reducing the impact of climate change?
Sure. Well, many of these sectors are actually in our global supply chains. They're in the upstream parts of the economy, manufacturing, energy production, agriculture, oil and gas, and then of course the very infrastructure and built environment that we have, like that guides our mobility and transportation systems, cities. So these are the most challenging sectors because this is where like most of the environmental impacts and emissions are. Yeah. A good way to frame this is, let's say, look at the source of the emissions by sector. And at PwC, we have done some work in terms of analyzing the state of climate tech around the world. And it's quite interesting because technology, of course, provides a big part of the solution for like the transformation towards net zero. However, this is quite a wicked challenge. There's also like some social and cultural aspects in terms of like the need to be changed. But in the technology part, of course, there's a lot of, especially like in the last couple of years, there's a lot of increased level of attentions by investors, especially like venture capitalists, scale-ups themselves, to invest and develop these kinds of technologies. However, what we're seeing is that the investment is not quite even in terms of, let's say, the solutions. Like we see that in 2020 alone, the second half, 87.5 billion USD were invested in climate tech. 2021 first half, 60 billion were invested. So we see a very positive trend rising. However, it is very much concentrated in specific sectors, being energy and also mobility, and a much significantly less amount in materials, manufacturing, agriculture. And of course, this imbalance, when it comes to, let's say, emission reduction potentials, we're seeing that 80% of the capital has been invested just goes for those solutions that, like 80% of the solutions for the climate impact, positive climate impact, is just receiving 25% of the total capital.
Right.
And
so the funds need to be allocated differently.
Yes.
In order to drive these technological changes in the challenging sectors, especially in agriculture and construction.
Yes, new materials. And then the other point I wanted to mention in terms of this part of technology is that, of course, for investors, the perspective goes about the level of maturity of these technologies and like what has already, let's say, passed the innovation breakthrough stage and what's already, let's say, in commercial application. We need to significantly drive more funds into those technologies that have huge emission reduction potential. Bring them into the commercialization phase so that they can be deployed at scale. But the technologies themselves, we already have them. It's a topic about
scalability.
Scalability and investments, and then of course like the cultural, social changes.
Great answer, thank you very much. My final question today concerns the social responsibility that businesses have towards the wider society, and in particular in terms of balancing economic inequalities, which in most estimates continue to rise globally. And technologies such as automation, artificial intelligence, along with high inflation and now the aftermath of the Russian invasion, run the risk of placing ever more pressure on jobs and wages. So how worried should we be about these risks? What role do businesses have to play in mitigating them? And how much of this challenge is down to our individual actions and public policy changes?
Right. So everything is interconnected. And everything, let's say, in systemic terms, I think this is something that, as a global economy, businesses, governments, we have started to really think and take action in systemic terms. Before, a lot of things were about operating in silos or thinking that growth is, so to speak, unlimited. However, there are limits to growth. There's constraints in terms of like physical resources, environmental degradation. We're seeing high levels of inequalities around the world, unprecedented, like that we have not seen, let's say, since the World War era, Great Depression era. And of course, it's worrisome. We even see, let's say, anxieties, like so many books that have been published about the importance or ways that we can like restructure the current form of capitalism towards something that is more like stakeholder oriented or sustainable or green or inclusive. And this tells a lot about what wider society as a whole feels. Individuals, of course, when you look at it from systemic perspective, it's easy to think that individual actions are like just a drop in the ocean. However, individual actions and, let's say, our behaviors, our values are actually like what ultimately feed the system in terms of signals. And we're seeing that things like environmentalism or, let's say, valuing the importance of diversity and inclusion that were not discussed at large maybe a couple of decades ago, now are being discussed at large. It means public values have changed, are changing, keep changing. And this is going to be very important because these are the signals that need to feed our institutions and our businesses, our behaviors. And then, of course, businesses are the leading drivers of economic growth and the economy as a whole in terms of investments, products, employment opportunities. So businesses have a very important role. However, the clear direction actually comes from public policy and like the governments and like what's the direction that they are setting for the economies themselves. There's a great book I can recommend I read recently from economists from the UK, Mariana Mazzucato. Talks about the importance of governments taking a role of becoming like co-market shapers and creators, and that they should take a role of setting the mission. And she cites the example of, let's say, the NASA Apollo program. Back in the day that the US government, they have no understanding about how they can send a man to the moon, but they just knew like within 10 years we need to send a man to the moon, bring it back. And that requires an unprecedented level of innovation and collaboration cross-sector that essentially is what we need for net zero. We need to innovate across sectors, across organizations, across department organizations, and bring an unprecedented level of collaboration in a very short period of time. So I think that's a good messaging way to frame it, that public institutions, they set the mission, set the direction. A lot of the implementation will come from businesses themselves. And then, of course, society at large. The economy should work for society, and of course, society provides like the work for the economy. And then there's that interconnection, and everybody has a role there where like we're working to achieve the future that we want to be in.
Yes. So our individual actions are absolutely key, and it's a good sort of message to finish our conversation on. Thank you very much, Jose. It's been an absolute pleasure to welcome you on our show today. So if you have any follow-up questions to Jose about any of the subjects raised, and especially the tech and the innovation report that you mentioned, maybe you'd like a few words on that?
Well, thank you, Miroslav. So net zero essentially is the challenge that we have for our generation, the next couple of decades that will come. And as mentioned, technology will play an important part of it. At PwC, we have been assessing the state of climate tech around the world in global terms. However, right now we are also aiming to bring regional edition to Central and Eastern Europe. So if you are a climate tech startup or scale up, or you know anybody that is working in this space, please feel welcome to contact us. We will be like identifying and scouting the top 50 climate tech solutions in the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose. So if you can contribute to this important subject, then please get in touch with our team via social media or on our email contact@greeneuropetoday.com. We have got some great episodes coming up for over the next few weeks, but if you would like to share some of your ESG experiences with the wider world, then please get in touch. Thank you very much for watching. See you again soon. Goodbye.